Hey everybody, welcome. This is Doyle Bueller, and I'm here with one of my weekly digital strategy sprints. And just going to be talking about the story about change. I'm going to be getting into that really shortly here. Let's make sure we've got everything all set up. So I've got some background music too. Thank you for joining me. My name again is Doyle Bueller. If you're joining me live, I appreciate that. And if you have any questions or comments along the way, please feel free to ask them. And if you're watching this in the replay, which I know a lot of people do, just hashtag replay and feel free to ask your question as well. And I'll get back to you as soon as I can as well. So there's lots to learn. Hopefully it won't be too long. But I'm going to be talking about, as I said, the story about change, right? There's a lot of things that we always need to be listening to and understanding in terms of how does actually change actually work, and what do we need to be able to do to make it work. And that is really what's fundamentally important here, is how do we understand all these different elements of change, and how do we put them into the perspective of change is good, and then how do we put these pieces in place, and how can we actually use this in terms of a strategy or a story or that sort of thing. So I'm going to quickly get into this as well. And what I wanted to talk about, as I said, was the story about change. And really, when we're looking at it, what does change? How is change defined, right? What is it that really says, okay, well, this is change? And we've actually have a symbol for change. And what is that? Anybody remember what that is? Right? It's called a delta. And this is the delta. This is the symbol for change. And you use it a lot in engineering and mathematics and all that kind of stuff. But we use it as well in what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. So if we look at that change, the story about change really is fundamentally about the story about delta. And the symbol of change for, what do we want to do here at the end of the day? We want to do a transformation. So, and in this case, we want to do a digital transformation. So basically using the tools and strategies that we have and that we're able to use, and to create a foundation, to create some keystones that allow us to be able to operate and function in the digital space. And with that, how do we change that, and how do we create those opportunities for us in our business as well? So we want to look at that from the perspective of this is digital transformation, and it's all about the change. But what typically happens in a change, right? Well, what do we really want to happen? You've probably seen these graphs, probably you might have drawn a few of them as well. This is how a lot of people define change. Okay, let's create this hockey stick curve. Let's create this unicorn, or whatever the case may be. And guess what? What happens? It doesn't always turn out the way that we want. We get started, and then we kind of flatten out like this. So we want this to happen, right? We want to see that growth. We want to see that expansion of our capabilities. And this is what actually happens. And if you look at it from here, one of the things that comes quite apparent is that we're trying to do that with something that's too big. Like if we talked about that delta, we talked about that. How does that actually affect that? Well, guess what? That's the piece that's we're trying to do. We're trying to affect too much change in too little time, right? The delta is too big. It's not necessarily useful. It's not necessarily helpful in terms of how you actually change it and what you need to be able to do to do that. So we get caught in this as well, and it's not any fault of our own. It's just kind of the way things have. So what do we have there? We actually have a smaller level of change. And you know what? Small is good too. It's a matter of how you actually use that small little change to be able to affect that bigger change, that bigger transformation that you want at the end of the day. And that's really the trick to understanding is, okay, so how do we actually deal with breaking down these larger changes into smaller changes to be able to do that? And if you look at it in terms of, if we just look at these in terms of, well, what if we did a series of smaller micro changes? What would that do? Well, that would get us a lot further where we want to be able to go. It would get us to this level, and then it would get us to this level, and then it would get us to this level, and then it would get us to this level. So we're actually able to grow incrementally from a lot of smaller changes, from a lot of these smaller deltas that I spoke of. And to me, that's key here, because this is what allows us to then build the story about change and how we can actually affect change within our business, within our digital transformation, within the things that we're creating and the things that we're doing for our audience and that sort of thing, and creating our value. Is if we can actually put these pieces into smaller steps, we can actually achieve much, much more. And so what we can actually do is this, right? We can do what we call a step change. That's what we're calling it. We hear about it, but do we actually know what it means? It's a step change because we're using smaller levels of change over a larger period of time. But guess what? We still get to the same place at the end of the day. We want to get here, we start here, we want to get there. We start here, we want to get here, right? So we're still doing the overall change. It's just a matter of how do we actually define that as well. So we want to do it through micro changes. Is fundamentally what we want to be able to do. So if that makes sense, if there's any questions, happy to answer them along the way as well. Feel free to put them in the chat. Let's see if I just click back to chat here. Yeah, so I've got it there. So if you do have some questions or comments, please, I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on this as well. It's a big subject, but what we're trying to do is kind of narrow it down and simplify it. Ultimately, that's what we want to do here is how do we actually simplify this problem in terms of, well, how do we move from a large change to a small change for digital transformation without missing a lot of this stuff. And one of the ways we can do that actually is by, let's say, so we have these 4 changes, right? We have these 4 changes here. So let's call them 1, 2, 3, 4. And what would happen if we actually stacked them? So what I mean by stacking is let's put them all together on the same diagram. Not quite perfect there, but whoops. Let's try that again. So what if we were able to stack them together? And what does that actually do? Well, that creates a combined mission. It creates a combined strategy that says all of these pieces are integrated. So all of these little micro steps, all of these little micro changes, this is what actually is coming together into one single piece, right? So if you're able to stack the elements, of change, what are you left with? You're left with basically an integrated process, an integrated story that tells you different things, but all leading towards the ultimate goal at the end, which is defined by these 4 little micro changes as well, these 4 little changes as well. And fundamentally, that's what we want to be able to do, is create that opportunity for us to be able to integrate these changes together so that we're always working together. We're always very, very focused on what we do and how we do it, but we've got something working for us, right? One big change becomes 12 micro changes as well as we get into it. And all these changes are working in unison together and with each other. So let's talk about this story just for a minute. So if we're able to then combine these elements together, we can actually create a little story. And we can start to tell it, and we can talk about it, and we can, build our value, we can communicate it, and that's how we really want to do that. So if we, instead of numbering these, what about if we call them something? So in this case, the model that I'm using, the first one is called audience. The second one is called methods. The third one is called process. Let's try that again. And the fourth one is called story. So now when I'm talking about my business, my strategy, how I actually are able to communicate that, I can actually put it into a cohesive story. So what do I talk about? Well, I talk about my audience. Then I can talk about how do we actually build the methods around that to deliver to our audience. And then how can I build that process to say, here is the journey that we're going to be taking you on. And then how can I actually, step number 4 is how can I actually tell the story around this? So you can see quite simply, we're putting all these different elements of change together into one key specific package. Now I can talk about it. Now I've got that clarity. Now I have that understanding of how all these different pieces work as well. So cool. So Amanda, Jane, yeah, thanks. Cannot wait to watch when I get home. Cool, thanks. Well, when you do get to watch it, please do so. And I would love to hear your feedback and comments on it as well. So let's keep going here. So hopefully that makes sense. So we're able to create from these 4 micro changes. I'll just quickly go through this. We want to be able to simplify the change, right? So how do we do that? We break it down into 4 micro changes because typically, again, that's how most people adapt. That's how most people implement change anyways. We can't do it all at once, but we can do smaller levels of change over time as well. So if we just take that, pretty basic principle, and say, okay, if that's going to happen anyway, let's break it down. Let's stack these elements of change into a specific sequence that allows us to tell us a very, very specific story. And that's how stacking of our changes can actually help us develop that. Now, if we take this a little bit further as well, one of the coolest things and one of the simplest things that you can imagine, okay, so I'll quickly draw this here. Remember, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, right? 4 elements, 4 micro changes. So if we unroll this, what do we get? If we unroll all of these individual elements, all these individual moments of change, what do we get? We get, again, 4 changes, but we can actually coordinate them a bit differently. And when we unroll that, I'll quickly draw that. We've got 3 sides to each triangle. Okay, and sometimes our changes might be big, and sometimes it might be small, and sometimes they'll have a little bit more impact, and sometimes a little bit less. So what we're trying to do here is saying, okay, element number 1 has 3 sides, so 1, 2, 3. Element 2 has 3 sides, 4, 5, 6. Element 3 has 3 sides as well, 7, 8, 9. And element 4 has 10, 11, and 12. And we got an extra one in there. So what does that mean? It means that we've actually created a roadmap forward from within our change itself. So hopefully you can see that. So within each of our triangles, we have 3 sides, A, B, C, and we're able to translate those and unroll those into specific activities that we need to be able to do. So instead of wandering around, what is this business doing? How are we delivering our value? How are we connecting with our audience? We can actually create that specific roadmap, that specific formula that we are going to go on anyways, right? We wanted to make a change. The change that we typically go through is just too big, so we break it down, and actually it's too big, and so this is what happens. We're forced to engage on smaller levels of change. So we need to switch to a model of micro-changing, giving us these steps. And then once we stack those elements, we're able to say, okay, this is our story. This is the story that we can tell, that we can talk about, that we can present to our audience and to our customers and to our team and everybody who's involved in that whole process as well. We can create these opportunities based on the business. And then if we unroll it again, this becomes our roadmap. If we break down all these pieces, we now have an itemized list of exactly what we need to do, when we need to do it, and how we're going to do it as well. All of the changes are working in unison, together, and with each other, which is really, really important. And if we unroll this, we get the order as well that we need to proceed with. So instead of just thinking randomly, well, we'll try this, and then we'll try that, and then we'll go here, and then we'll go here. No, it's very simple. We need to understand how the pieces fit together. So let's put it into a process. Let's put it into a roadmap to get exactly to our destination. That's where we want to go at the end of the day, right? Cool. So any questions so far? The stacking and the unrolling of this becomes your story. And that's probably the key here. And I want to take this a little bit further because this is where it actually really becomes quite unique in terms of how do you actually use this? Okay, so I'm drawing this out and I'm playing around with these pieces and we're talking about change and we built a roadmap, lickety split, but how else can we actually visualize this? How can we actually see it? And how important is it to be able to convey that properly? So I don't know about you, but I do like work around the house, gardening and watering the lawn and that sort of thing. And one of the things I found is that if you're trying to roll a hose up, what typically happens as you're rolling this thing up, it doesn't actually wind properly. Like, have you ever noticed that? And if you haven't, then the next time you go wind your hose or a wire or a cable or the vacuum cord or whatever the case may be, if you try to wind it up, it actually becomes twisted into and out of itself. So what do you actually have to do? You have to give it a little flick, right? Every once in a while, you have to give it a little flick to rotate it. And the reason why you're doing that is because what is a hose? Back to my graphs, it's two-dimensional. It's X and Y. So we're actually translating this into a three-dimensional space because you hold your hose, you go move it around your 3D world, right? And you might go, well, what's he talking about? But this is just a simple sort of explanation in terms of, okay, well, how do these pieces fit together as well? And so if we understand that concept, most of what we're talking about every single day is two-dimensional. Okay? What is that? Your business plan. Well, not that many people use that, but even like social media, right? Social media, your worksheets, for example, those are two-dimensional. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, quite simply. Your books, those are two-dimensional. The problem with that is that over time, they kind of just get stacked into a book or something, a pile of paper somewhere, and you don't know exactly where that is anymore, right? But what if you've been able to translate that into the three dimensions as well? So if we quickly do that, what do we do when we translate a pyramid? What happens when we translate a triangle, a delta sign, into 3D space, right? X, Y, and Z. Well, we get a pyramid. And so what would it mean, pyramid? Let's try that again. And what would that mean if we could actually then, remember I talked earlier about stacking the triangles? So we had these four triangles, right? They're all integrated. And if we actually pull them apart, we actually are able to create them into 3D. And that's what we've created here. That's what I've created here, is what is basically a tetrahedron that allows us to be able to put each of the symbols of change. Remember, we talked about the four different elements of change on four different surfaces, and it suddenly became a 3D object. So we can now look at this, we can present it, we can talk about it. It tells us our story. Remember, it tells us our strategy, and it tells us the roadmap, the specific steps that we need to be able to go through for each of these as well. How? All with, basically combining these four symbols of change together and producing it with, I like to call it tabs. And I'll show you in a minute how that all works. But remember in grade school when you'd actually cut something out of paper? And then that became the model that you're able to produce as well. So that's actually what I've done here, is been able to create a specific 3D strategy, storytelling, and roadmap model from two-dimensional space. So we're able to take the idea, the concepts of your business, how it actually fits together into a sheet. Actually, I'll switch this over. So we're able to put it into a sheet like that. We have the four different triangles, and in this case, these are identified for this specific story that we're trying to tell. So I've grouped all of the changes together for each of the specific elements of change that we want to accomplish. So we take this, we're able to create them online in the Tetrahedron builder, and we were able to print it out directly. And then guess what? By adding those tabs, we can cut it out into our shape. Again, our model of change hasn't changed. We're still dealing with these pieces, with the output of the triangles, the deltas, the four elements of change that we've broken down into four different pieces. But again, everything is integrated, so we're able to see those pieces together directly. And from that, once we fold it and glue it and make fancy, we then create the Tetrahedron, which allows us then to, again, tell the story of our business. We're able to understand how the pieces interact. We're able to see the overall strategy that we're trying to convey. And as I mentioned as well, we're able to see the specific steps, the roadmap along each of these specific phases that allow us to get to our destination with our business. So it's a pretty cool tool. It's completely customizable. You can create your own. It's based on that model. If I can just flip back here, it's based on the 4 parts of the model as well, right? The audience, the method, the process, and the story. And you're able to create these individually with the Tetrahedron builder. And then that's what you can actually produce. So you'll be able to produce an output. You'll then be able to cut it, create your specific piece as well. And I want to show you a quick video as well. And then I'll wrap up and head off from there. But we'll watch this video. There we go. All right, cool. How was that? So that was just a little taster, a little teaser of what you can actually do with it and how you can build it and that sort of thing. So if you'd like to, I'm just going to wrap up here, but hopefully that has been helpful. Hopefully it kind of puts those little pieces together in terms of, well, how do I actually tell my story online, and how do I create that into a strategy? And then ultimately, how do I actually create that as a roadmap to have specific steps along the way that can really kind of help guide me in my business forward towards, where are we headed with this? So it's a cool little tool. I'm just kind of in the beta steps of it. But if you're interested in kind of testing it out or trying it out, please feel free to reach out, contact me, send me a message as well. And if you do take the business GPS scorecard, sorry, there it comes again, bit.ly/business GPS, I'm actually going to include in that a way to kind of take a look at the online version of it as well. So really encourage you, if you want to kind of see what it's all about, how you might be able to use it to tell your story, create your strategy, and create a remarkable roadmap for your business, then this is the tool that you can do that. So please go to bit.ly/business GPS, and just for the spelling of it, the GPS is in uppercase as well. So all right, well, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. I appreciate your comments and questions. And like I said, if you have any later, I'll happily go through that. If you need to reach out to me directly, please feel free to do that as well. So thank you as well, again, everybody, and we will see you guys online.